This is the new Ferrari 812 GTS, and it's the convertible version of the amazing Ferrari 812 Superfast. On paper, this looks pretty amazing. V12 power, almost 800 horsepower, and a sticker price of around $500,000. And today, I'm going to review it. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era, the 1980s and up. We've had some amazing sales recently on Cars and Bids, including this DeLorean, which sold for $44,000, this Mercedes E63 AMG wagon, which sold for $30,000, and this excellent AP2 Honda S2000, which sold for $29,000, among many more. If you're looking to sell your cool car from the modern era, sell it with Cars and Bids. You can check it out at carsandbids.com. But let's talk 812 GTS. I've borrowed this car from a viewer here in Southern California, and it is amazing. The convertible 812 with a 790 horsepower V12. It'll do 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds, and it has a sticker price of around $500,000 with options. Now, I've already reviewed the regular 812 Superfast, the coupe, but I wanted to review this one also because it's a big deal. And it's not just a big deal because it's fast and expensive. Ferrari doesn't generally do V12 convertibles. In fact, Ferrari hasn't made a regular production V12 convertible since the Daytona Spider in the 1970s, 50 years ago. All V12 Ferrari convertibles since then have been ultra limited production. Think about the 550 Barchetta, the F50, the 575 Super America, all very limited production runs. The 812 GTS is the first time in decades that a regular person can get a V12 Ferrari convertible without having to hope for a spot in line. And so today we'll see what a V12 Ferrari convertible is like. First, I'll take you on a tour of the 812 GTS and show you all of its interesting quirks and features. Then I'll get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a Doug score. Alright, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the 812 GTS by discussing its roof, which is obviously its biggest differentiator, versus the regular 812. Now, to operate the roof, you press this little button in the center console, the car with like a convertible roof, and then the roof begins going up. This roof takes 14 seconds to go from down to up, and you can do it at speeds of up to 30 miles an hour, raise or lower the roof. And you can see it's a retractable hardtop, so when it's going up, it doesn't have a cloth soft top, but it is a hardtop convertible. Meanwhile, of course, you've put up the roof, but it is a nice, beautiful, sunny day here, so it's time to take the roof back down. Again, go back to this switch in the center console, pull it back to put the roof down, and then you can see the roof goes off the car, again in about the same time, and again operable at speeds of up to around 30 miles an hour. And then you have access to a top-down V12 Ferrari, which is something that basically no one has been able to experience outside of a few very limited special models before this. But there's more to cover with the roof than just the fact that it goes up and down. Check this out. On the other side of the center console from the roof button, you have a different switch that looks like a power window switch. This controls a powered window behind the seats in the middle. You can use the switch to put it up or down. You have a little power window back here, a third power window, if you will. Now, when the roof is down, the function of this window is obvious. You can put it up, and then it'll become the wind deflector to kind of keep wind from blowing around. Instead, it'll go straight over the interior of the car. Or you could put it down for a full top-down, open-air, full roadster experience. But here's the cool thing with this back window. You can also put it down when the roof is up. Check this out. You can see it's going down even though the roof is in place. And the benefit here is pretty substantial. That means you can still listen to this V12 roar with an open window behind you, even if it's bad weather and you can't quite put down the roof. You can still get some of that open air, wind-blown feeling and the V12 sound. That is a pretty cool feature. But changes to the 812 GTS over the standard 812 go beyond just the roof. There are quite a few subtle and not so subtle updates on the exterior that set this car apart from the regular coupe. Now on the side, the most obvious is this little window piece here behind the front windows. On the regular 812, the coupe, you can see it has a completely different shape. It sort of follows the roof line on down towards the back of the car. On the 812 GTS, this isn't a window. It's just a plastic piece, and you can see it's curved forward and has a completely different line on the side compared to the standard windows in the 812 Superfast. The most obvious exterior change between these two cars, though, is in the back. While the regular 812 has a normal sloping roofline with a glass rear window, like a lot of coupes and fastback cars have, this instead has what Ferrari calls flying buttresses. There are two individual buttresses designed to mirror where the two seats are in the car, and Ferrari says these buttresses are designed to, quote, visually embody a sense of thrust. It certainly works. They look like rockets on the back of this car, and that's probably the most distinguishing feature of the GTS compared to the regular Superfast, these individual flying buttresses in back. And we're still not done with exterior changes yet. Another big one is back here. The rear diffuser on the 812 GTS is different and in fact more aggressive than the one on the regular 812. There's a reason for that. The GTS, with all of its convertible top architecture, is about 165 pounds heavier than the regular 812 coupe, but Ferrari didn't want the performance to be any worse. So to account for that, they made some aero changes to the outside of the car to make it faster, and one of those was the more aggressive rear diffuser, which I guess helps it cut through the air just a little bit quicker. Another change made in the pursuit of getting the GTS's performance to align with the regular 812s with the gear ratios. The GTS has closer gear ratios than the regular 812, again for better acceleration to try to counteract that weight gain compared to the standard model. But if you want to know the most subtle difference of all between the 812 GTS and the regular 812, something only the car detail geeks like me are going to care about, look to the windshield. The 812 GTS has these little L-shaped pieces on the top corners of the windshield, one on both sides. Very small, very subtle, but they have a purpose. According to Ferrari, these flaps generate a coherent, concentrated vortex that creates outwash in the velocity field immediately above the rear screen. I don't know what any of that means, but basically it improves the car's aerodynamics. And only the GTS has these little flaps. So if you remember nothing else distinguishing the coupe and the GTS, remember the flaps. It's the easiest giveaway. Now, next up, let's talk window sticker. Earlier I mentioned that this car costs $500,000, and you might have thought I was exaggerating for effect because the base price of this car has been published to be around $390,000. But I am not exaggerating. The window sticker is right here, and if you look at it, you can see a total price of just under $520,000, meaning that this car has about $120,000 to $130,000 in options and extras, which is unbelievable. And the crazy part here is the owner told me when he was going to pick it up, he was surprised at how expensive it was, and the dealer told him that most of the ones they're delivering are actually coming to about $540,000, $550,000. So this is sort of a medium to lightly equipped version of the 812 GTS with a $520,000 sticker price. Now, a couple things I love on this window sticker. I love how cavalier they are about money. It's absurd. You have the sticker price, and then you have the shipping and handling cost, which is $3,950. Then below that, you have additional costs listed as $3,000. What are the additional costs? What does that mean? There's no explanation anywhere. There's just extra costs, $3,000. You just pay it. That's just what you do. I also love down where it's listing the options, it goes over each individual option very carefully, listing each price down to an exact dollar amount, $2,531, $4,843. And then you get to the bottom of the list and it says other options, $64,000. So it carefully lists out each individual option until it runs out of room, and then it just says other options are $65,000, which is more than the vast majority of people spend to buy a car. Here, it's just options that won't fit on the window sticker. But with that said, if you want to know all of the options that this car has, you can always go to the trunk. Inside the trunk, on the inside of the trunk lid, there is a plaque that lists out every single option and extra that this car was ordered with, and you can see a wide array of personalization options, extra special features, all sorts of different stuff, and it translates to a really, really beautiful build. When you get back into this interior, I love some of the choices that were made in here, including you have blue carbon fiber basically everywhere, which looks amazing. You have it on the steering wheel. It's all trimmed in this gorgeous blue carbon fiber to match the exterior. You have it on this sort of center console bridge with buttons on it. Again, more blue carbon fiber. You even have blue carbon fiber lining the climate control vents, which looks fantastic. All these personalization options make for a truly beautiful interior and truly fantastic attention to detail. And speaking of the climate control vents, I want to discuss them briefly because I love how the climate control vents look in this car. They look like rocket launchers. It's like the kind of climate control vents you want a performance car to have. And you can move them around any direction or position you want, which is of course very satisfying. I love the look and the feel of these climate control vents. I think they're perfect for the interior of this car. With that said, onto the actual climate controls themselves, I've never liked this climate control setup in the center control stack area. You have a lot of tiny buttons. They look cheap. It is not the kind of stuff you would expect to see in a Ferrari, especially one at this price point. Now, the good news is I recently reviewed the Ferrari Roma, which has sort of the new version of Ferrari's interior, and these climate control buttons are going away, which is a good thing. They do not fit with the standard of this car, all these beautiful personalization features, and then you have these crappy plastic buttons in the center. But anyway, next I'm moving on to the rest of the stuff in this interior. Now, I'm not going to cover everything in here because I did do a thorough detailed review on the 812 Superfast, the coupe version of this car, which I will link in the description below. But I do want to hit some of the more interesting and unusual highlights. That means starting with the steering wheel, which is very interesting and unusual. For one thing, you have a bright red engine start stop button on here. Obviously, you press that to start or stop the engine in this car, but the steering wheel has oh so much more than that on it. For instance, the turn signals are mounted on the steering wheel. These little buttons on the left or right, you can press them with your thumb, and then that will activate or deactivate your turn signals when you're driving around, so you don't have a turn signal stalk coming off the steering column like every other car in a Ferrari. It's done with buttons. And it's the same deal with the wipers. You don't have a windshield wiper stalk coming off the steering column like basically every car. Instead, you control the wipers with this little dial on the steering wheel and this little button, and that's how you turn on and off and activate your windshield wipers. Again, different from most other cars. The other interesting item on the steering wheel is this very noticeable red switch at the bottom right of the wheel. That changes between your different drive modes. You have wet, sport, race, and then two modes that allow you to turn off various stages of traction control. I love the fact that there's no normal mode in this car. You either have sport mode or it's wet. There's no reason to be driving normally unless it is wet. That is Ferrari's theory, and frankly, given what this car is, I think it's a good one. Now, obviously, if you think about it, you can figure out why all of these controls are mounted on the steering wheel. It's because Ferrari makes these cars incredibly fast, incredibly high performance. They don't want you to have to take your hands off the steering wheel to perform various vehicle functions. So everything is right within your easy reach without you having to let go and potentially lose control at high speed or on the racetrack. But anyway, more interesting controls in here. When you start this car up, you're starting in neutral. To put the car into first gear, basically to engage drive, there's no shift lever you pull, there's no button you press. Instead, you pull the right shift paddle, the upshift paddle, which is of course gorgeous blue carbon like so many other things in this interior. You pull that, then you're in first gear, and then you can start driving. You've basically shifted into drive using the paddles. Now, two other interesting transmission controls are in the center, on this bridge, I call it, in the center console, where you have a few different buttons. At the top you have R, which puts the car into reverse. So if you're stopped, you press R, you're going backwards. You also have the auto button on here, which puts the car into automatic mode. So if you don't want to be shifting with the paddles, press auto, and the car will shift like an automatic. It'll do it for you. The other interesting button on this blue carbon bridge is marked PS, which stands for power start. That is Ferrari's version of launch control, but they don't call it launch control because they are Ferrari. They call it split PS, power start. Now, next up, speaking of this center area, you will notice looking in this car that there is no center screen. Even though this is a new, very expensive car, everything else has a center screen, not the 812 GTS. Instead, all of your vehicle functions you would have in a center screen are controlled in the gauge cluster. The screen on the right controls your navigation system, your music and media, your phone, your settings, all of that stuff that would normally be in a center screen is now here. And it's controlled with these little dials and buttons to the right of the steering wheel. You can move around the dials, press the buttons, and that adjusts all of the menus and settings in here. Now this works out great if you're driving the car, but it's a bit of a problem if you're the passenger, because the passenger therefore doesn't have access to change the radio station, to input a navigation destination, none of that stuff. It's all confined to the driver's screen for the driver's use only, which seems like a cool thing in a driver-focused car, but in practice it can make things a little challenging if you want your passenger to help out with simple stuff like making a phone call or setting a navigation destination. Now the good news, again, in the Roma review that I recently did, you can see they've now gone to a full center touchscreen accessible to both front seat occupants, and I suspect the next generation of the 812 will get that screen, and so the old driver-only screen will go away. Now next up, worth noting, that screen isn't the only important thing in the gauge cluster. Over on the left you have another screen, and this is more your car settings, the typical stuff you would see in a gauge cluster limited only to the driver. It displays like the current speed you're traveling, your current fuel level, your engine temperature, your tire pressures, that sort of thing, all in the screen over on the left. And this screen is controlled with a set of little dials and buttons to the left of the steering wheel. You adjust those and you can move around in this screen. And right in the middle of the gauge cluster, of course, like in all Ferrari models, you have a giant tachometer, old school analog. This hasn't become a screen just yet, and it is huge and it is beautiful. In this car, the owner chose to make it silver to match some of the trim in the interior, the wheels, and it looks very interesting, very cool to see that huge Ferrari tachometer right in the center. And speaking of things that look great with this car, let's talk styling. I absolutely love it. Top up or top down, this is a beautiful car. The regular 812 Superfast Coupe is a beautiful car. This one is too. I love the long flat hood, all of the beautiful flowing lines down the side. This is a gorgeous, gorgeous car, and it still looks gorgeous even in GTS form. Absolutely beautiful. And of course, it also sounds really good. You would expect that from a Ferrari. Take a listen to the 812 GTS revving a little bit. And of course, there is a reason for this beautiful sound, and that would be right here, this massive V12, 6.5 liter V12, like I said, about 800 horsepower, 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds, unreal. And best of all, this is still a naturally aspirated V12, which is a big deal because a lot of people think this might be the last naturally aspirated V12, the end of the line for non-turbo V12 Ferraris. Ferrari has not confirmed that yet, but their V8 models have already switched to turbocharged engines. That turbo V8 is a great engine. It just doesn't quite sound as good as an old school NA engine, a V8, or in this case, a V12, like in this car, a truly fantastic powertrain. And frankly, even the engine in this car looks beautiful. The red trim on top, the Ferrari logos down the side. This is how a Ferrari V12 should look. It's fantastic. You just have to wonder how much longer they can keep getting away with these big old NA V12s in today's world of fuel economy regulations and emissions standards. It might kill the V12 after this car, but at least we have it here. And so those are the quirks and features of the Ferrari 812 GTS. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, time to drive the 812 GTS. I loved driving the 812 Superfast, although I must admit, these V12 Ferraris aren't quite as special to me as I feel like they were 20 years ago. You know, back then you'd only had a few of them. Kind of in the modern era. There was the Testarossa, then there was the 550 Maranello. Well, now they've made the 575, the 599, the F12, then this. They're just kind of like in a line. It's like, okay, another V12 front engine Ferrari. This is what they do. And so the surprise isn't there anymore, and kind of the cool factor is lost a little, and they're becoming more evolutions. The 812 is sort of an evolution of the F12 styling. But from a purely driving perspective, The 812 was one of the great cars I have ever driven. I mean, unbelievably fast, unbelievably precise, and kind of dailyable. So let's see what this thing's like. To start off, just kind of cruising around, surprised to say it's pretty easy to drive. Maybe not surprised, I remember that from the 812, the coupe, but it's relatively easy to use, which is interesting. I mean, this is a Ferrari, it's supposed to be hard-edged and crazy, but you could certainly daily this if you wanted to, daily a $520,000 car. The moment you start steering anywhere, you just become acutely aware this car's steering is so good. It used to be kind of that if you got a V12 front-engine Ferrari, you were taking a bit of a penalty on steering because they were built more for grand touring and for high-speed straight line. This car, not so much. I feel like this car is every bit as precise as the mid-engine cars, which defies the laws of physics. Oh. Wow. The power is amazing, and I'll floor it in a second here. I really feel the acceleration, but the really impressive part just then is the sound. The owner of this car told me to expect a slightly different sound from the regular 812. They had to make some changes to the engine, I think, for emissions stuff in Europe. And so the exhaust sound is a little different from the regular 812. And I have to say, I think it sounds better. It sounds almost peakier, not quite as wide and huge like a big V12 should, but almost more like Formula One-y, like it peaks at the top. Wow, boy, is it fast. Here alone on the Pacific Coast Highway, there's nobody else coming around. This is amazing. What an experience, top down. I mean, this is what this car was intended to do. It was supposed to be a top down, fun, sunny day car that still gave you all the benefits of the regular 812. I can tell you firsthand, it does that. I must say, I'm a little spoiled. I drove a Bugatti Chiron yesterday. Pretty hard, actually. And then getting into this, it definitely isn't as fast as a Chiron. There's no question about that. But it is still a very impressive car. And the sound is really, really amazing. Man, unbelievable. Oh, it's just an incredible sounding car. No surprise, we get this NA V12, and it's Ferrari. They milk it. They make sure it sounds good. $500,000, a lot of money for a car. It really is. But if you're gonna spend it, or at least in my opinion, if you're gonna spend it, you'd wanna get a car that can kind of do it all. And I feel like this is that even more than the coupe. I live here in Southern California, it's always sunny. It's always beautiful out, and so having the convertible, that adds to the experience. I think this car is only starting to become let down by its technology. The tech in here is just kind of a disaster. The screens only being in the gauge cluster and no passenger reach, no touch screen. It just seems pretty far behind considering everyone else has upgraded to something a little bit better. But obviously that's coming in the future with the 812. The GTS, we're probably near the end of the line, another year or two with the 812, then they'll switch into a new model. So it's tolerable, but I think that's this car's only real drawback. The performance is unbelievable, the acceleration, handling, the sound, and even the daily driving abilities. You could totally use this every day and enjoy the sunshine, and that's pretty cool. And so that's the Ferrari 812 GTS, the first production car, regular, normal Ferrari V12 in decades, if you can call it that. This car is amazing. The regular 812 is incredible. This is even better, and I love it. It's just really, really expensive. And now it's time to give the 812 GTS a Doug score.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the 812 GTS is gorgeous and it gets an 8 out of 10. Acceleration to 0 to 60 in some insane sub 3 second situation, it gets a 10 out of 10. Handling is tremendously sharp, incredibly impressive, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Fun factor is excellent and it gets a 9 out of 10. Cool factor is huge. These are already cool in coupe form, but the convertible top makes it even more special, and it gets a 9 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 45 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. This is well equipped, but the tech in the 812 is getting old. It definitely needs Ferrari's new infotainment from the Roma and the SF90, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Comfort is normal for a car like this, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Quality is excellent. The materials are great, and Ferrari reliability has improved considerably over the years, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Practicality, 2 seats in a relatively small cargo area, gives it a 2 out of 10. Finally, value, and this thing is just so expensive, so wildly expensive. It offers a lot, but it's such big money, and we all know it'll lose value fast. It gets a 5 out of 10 for a total daily score of 26 out of 50. Add it up, and the Doug score is 71 out of 100, which places it here against relevant cars. The 812 GTS gets the exact same score as the 812 Superfast, though they have slightly different scoring. The GTS gets an extra point in cool factor because a V12 Ferrari convertible is just so rare and cool, but the coupe gets an extra point in value because the GTS is just so damn expensive. Either way, these are excellent cars with truly amazing performance.